So we're going to invite our first speaker. Let's see. The first speaker is Brian Torelli from Deloitte. The title for today's talk is actually Silent Shield, Lessons Learned Designing, Building, and Going to Orbit with a Cyber Intrusion Detection Payload. Let me introduce Brian. Brian is a specialist leader at Deloitte. His primary area of expertise is cyber risk for space, supporting large national satellite constellation with systems engineering and complex technical acquisition, ranging from computer systems to satellite parts and software. During his career supporting the government, he has worked with the U.S. Air Force and intelligence community programs. Brian has secondary areas of expertise in geospatial intelligence, including overhead persistent infrared technology, analysis, design, and acquisition. Brian, it's a great honor to have you as part of the conference. Thank you for being here. The floor is yours.
So for those of you who don't know, Deloitte doesn't normally do things in space. We're a tax, audit, and accounting firm. So why is there a guy opening a conference on cybersecurity for a tax, audit, and accounting firm? That's a solid question. Quick history lesson. Deloitte has been doing cyber for a very long time, actually. I was hired 7 years ago to do ground systems engineering and reverse engineering to incorporate cyber protections. So if you haven't seen the news in the last 2 weeks, everyone's starting to realize that satellite systems are surprisingly insecure. Plain text communications, lack of encryption, no logins whatsoever into anything, unsecure protocols, computers that you can just, with a 3-meter dish in your backyard or a trash can, start listening to everything that's going on in space. It's not exactly ideal. So a couple of years ago, we hypothesized, how bad is it? So to demonstrate, I built a small rig and I sent some JSON commands into space, and I took over about 30% of all the satellites over my head at any given time. Don't do that is the lesson. But I did it anyway because I kind of needed to know, and I needed to prove the point. So I've been working in the US government now for 15 years, building national constellations, and working at Deloitte, I didn't realize that it kind of works in a way that I could just ask them to do whatever I wanted to do, and if they agreed with me, they would just give me money to do it. So one of those ideas was, let's build a satellite, and let's put it into space. So we built a satellite. You rely on space more than you probably realize. I rely on space at least twice before I get out of bed every single morning. The first one is checking the weather. If you check the weather, you are relying on a space system. If you check a bank account, you are relying on a space system. The most prevalent space system of all is GPS, by a long shot. Everything you do has some tie to GPS. The stock market literally will not run without GPS. And GPS is only okay. So I've given examples to Deloitte on the effectiveness of GPS. What is time is always the question. Time, when measured in nanoseconds, like in GPS, is about this big. Time, when measured with China's new satellites in picoseconds, is about this big. Well, what can happen if a cyber adversary messed with time? To test this, I also bought a satellite for the ground that had a GPS receiver and transmitter. Also, fun fact, learned it was illegal after I did it. If you change time by 1 second, I thought this would just move me like 40 feet. Very wrong, because the satellites for GPS are moving extremely fast. So to locate you at the speed that you're going, 1 second is actually 432 miles. So I might have accidentally told everything in a 3-kilometer radius of me that it was off by 430 miles. I did get a phone call. It was okay. Luckily, because I've been working in national security and they kind of know who I am, it was just like a slap on the wrist. Try not to do that again. But the point there is everything is in space. Space is congested. There's also a lot of articles about that. But what's cool about space is it's bigger than Earth. I have had to explain this to the risk personnel of Deloitte 100 times. When they're like, well, what if our satellite hits the International Space Station? And I'm like, cool. It's in a different orbit. It's at a different height. We're not there. And then the next question was, well, what if The day we're supposed to deorbit, for some reason, we don't burn up in the atmosphere and we hit a building. And I'm like, cool. So if physics didn't work, yeah, I guess that's a risk. Now, we're not going to completely burn up. That's true. But mathematically, we're designed to degrade over an ocean and we'll be fine powder by the time we hit the ground. Not a big deal. And then it got off the rails and I got kicked out of all future risk discussions because I couldn't help myself but be sarcastic with these people whose jobs I'm now very envious of just thinking of the worst scenario at any time possible. So, space is bespoke. Space is unique. Every space asset that is in orbit today is custom. There is no, everyone uses the same protocol, everyone uses the same flight software. That doesn't actually exist. It's a hodgepodge of real-time operating systems based on Linux, using ARM64 processors, mostly on modern systems, or a old BAE Systems processor that's like 400 megahertz that we've been using for like 20 years. That is how space operates. So the next thing we had to do was, well, how bad is it? If we tried to break into a satellite that was in orbit, would it be easy? Thinking of traditional tools like an Nmap or something for scanning networks, you can scan a satellite the exact same way. What we found was that a lot of satellites have vulnerabilities based on running not legal copies of MATLAB that they're not updating. Those copies of MATLAB control flight dynamics. So you can turn satellites into weapons by just sending the right commands if you know where they are and you know where the other thing is. And no one's gonna actually know you did it. So we fingerprinted a bunch of satellites, and then someone decided that was kind of risky at Deloitte, because naturally. So instead they gave me a bank account and I bought a bunch of satellite components. Like, I filled a room with satellite components. And then I started building a team of former NSA FPGA reverse engineers. And we tore it up. Amazing. We learned every vulnerability, we started documenting everything, we started telling manufacturers about the problems that they had, which they told us they didn't actually care. And then we got to the next thing that we learned. But my satellite's up there. Who's gonna go up there and plug a USB drive into it to insert a vulnerability and break into it? Radio frequency is apparently above reproach. So, that was painful. This was a cool moment in my life. I don't know if it'll play, and if it does, I can't say it matters too much, but I went to watch our satellite launch, the first one, in March of this year. This was about 2 o'clock in the morning in California, and it was the first commercial satellite that I can say I've supported, because I've only ever done government satellites. I can also say it was the cheapest satellite I've ever launched, but at the same time meant the most to me. Space is becoming more accessible for places. The cost to buy, build, and launch a satellite for us was, I think, $4.2 million over 4 years. The last satellite I launched on behalf of the US government was $8.2 billion and took 7 years to build. That's a huge difference in cost. There are a few notable differences. The multi-billion-dollar one had solar panels that were greater than 100 meters around, and it weighed 11,000 pounds. This little guy only weighed 12 kilograms, so like maybe 25 pounds, and it was like super tiny, like 20 centimeters by 30 centimeters by 10 centimeters. So it was adorable. Now, we built this tool because we wanted to understand how things worked. So it's effectively an intrusion detection system. You can't respond to threats on any system unless you understand what the threats do and what the threats look like. Everybody wants, well, defend my satellite, do something, protect the thing, we need help, we need it now. And my answer is always, yeah, I can put something on there that thinks it's gonna do the right thing, but the first time I turn your satellite into a brick, you're never getting it back. That's not ideal. So instead, we tried to figure out what's going on, how is it going on? And luckily there's organizations that are helping. Aerospace Corporation being the biggest. MITRE's attack framework for terrestrial systems, same concept by aerospace for defending and detecting space attacks. So they studied how adversaries attack satellites, because it actually happens all the time, it's just no one talks about it. So how do they do it? What's the common entry point? Is it supply chain? Is it based on radio frequency? Supply chain was surprisingly cool to research for us. So with all the reverse engineered components, when you force them into thinking they're in space, some of them would do odd things and try to call places when they reached certain altitude thresholds. So basically, if you're above 590 kilometers, which is a low Earth orbit flight, some components tried to take over satellites. Some components tried to call home. Some components started manipulating data, man-in-the-middle attacks in space. Remember, there's no cyber. Telnet is more common than SSH when it comes to space systems, and everything is just plain text, unencrypted between all the payloads, so it's just it's implicit trust. Everyone these days talks about no trust, right? Following frameworks where you don't trust anybody, zero trust frameworks. Space, not so much. Old satellites mitigated this in the coolest way possible. Like satellites from like the 60s and 70s, if you wanted to use the radio, there was an arm in the satellite that would go clunk. That is now the only active payload. It got its power, it got its radio. And then when it was done, clunk back over to somebody else. No one was talking in between all the other systems. Now it's complex. Our little tiny satellite has 2 CAN bus networks that are completely unencrypted and open, and 2 Ethernet networks that are completely unencrypted and open. That's a lot of ARP traffic. That's a lot of internal bus traffic. That's everyone yelling for the radio all the time. Everyone wants to talk. And how do you look at that feasibly? So we wanted to build our tool, at least for demonstration, in a way that it couldn't break anything. Key goal. How do you build something for computers that doesn't break anything but can still somehow talk became the next challenge. So utilizing a field programmable gated array, my favorite slide, by the way, even though they took away all the good version of it. It used to be way more complicated. We took a off-the-shelf Xilinx Multiscale Plus FPGA. These are commercially available for $1,300. When you apply them to space, all of a sudden they cost $130 because reason. But they're cheap, they're affordable for building tests. And the idea was, let's run Ethernet and CAN into the FPGA, and we'll slice the pins on the FPGA, effectively creating one-way networking. Sounds cool. Ethernet is really resilient. When you slice pins in the wrong place, Ethernet just says, oh, I don't have enough for gigabit, but I can do 100 meg still. And then if you slice more, it says, 10 meg half is good enough. I only need 2. That was a huge pain. We had to find a way to trick Ethernet at the physical layer to thinking the handshake had occurred electronically and then slice the wires on the back end. So effectively, all the payloads know something is there, but they can't talk to it, it can't talk back, so it doesn't exist. So we siphon all the data from every single thing happening in a promiscuous mode Ethernet, super simple, and we process everything in space. This is where you get to the next part in space. You don't have a really good computer in space. Our computer is a dual-core 1.4 gigahertz with 2 gigabytes of DDR3 and 64 gigabytes on an SD card. That's like a Raspberry Pi from 10 years ago. Yeah. The next constraint, power. Satellites have batteries and solar panels. So you can't exactly just drain the battery every day. You have to use minimal power. So we are not authorized to use more than 8 watts of power at any given time. So less than your phone. If you were using your phone right now and plugged it into your charger, you'd use more than 8 watts. So the next problem becomes efficiency. How do you code in a way that the processor can do these things efficiently and at speed? You use the closest language to assembly that you can, which is legacy C code. We don't even teach developers how to do legacy C code. I didn't learn legacy C code when I was in college or in high school. I took Java, which would have been a terrible code for satellites because I would just like Java heap like half a gig of all my RAM for one process. So you use C. The entire software package that we're working with today is 12 megabytes. 4 megabytes of that is AES 256 encryption, just because we wanted to be the only encrypted thing on the satellite. It seemed like a good idea. So ingest all the data off the backplane in under 8 watts of power, process everything in space, and send down alerts. Send down alerts became the next problem. Well, I'm dioded from everything. How do I send an alert down from being dioded? The trick there, make your payload a software-defined radio. Use the FPGA as an FPGA. Software-defined radio, use UHF and VHF frequencies. So the FPGA was tuned. We can ingest 149,000 events per second at 3 watts of power. The CPU running the pure C code scales pretty well, uses another 2 watts of power to process 40,000 events per second. We can see what's going on inside of a satellite with less power than your phone. That did not happen overnight. It took about 4 years for us to get there, and it's still constantly expanding. Because the cool thing about searching for threats is they just keep coming. It's exhaustive. You will never find the end to cyber threats for anything. Whether it's critical infrastructure, terrestrial IT systems, there's a new threat every day. There's a new vulnerability, whether it's built by someone that's at home that's bored, like me on accident, someone that's paid by a government somewhere else that's really clever and has massive backing and a team of researchers, someone smarter that can disassemble all your code and find your vulnerabilities, or someone who intentionally placed it into an open source library that every single person uses every single day. So that's some of the quick things that we learned about doing this in space. The next things we learned about doing anything in space is that space has demand signals that people don't think about outside of cyber that still tie to cyber. Best use case, everything on the ground that transmits any sort of RF signal is fair game. Any RF signal you can find anywhere in the world is fair game for you to listen to. If you have one satellite, you can tell where that sound is coming from within 50 kilometers. If you have 2 satellites, you can tell where that sound is coming from within 10 meters. If you have 3 satellites, you can tell where that thing is in 3D space within 10 centimeters. So we started playing nice with other satellite manufacturers and going, hey, I've noticed that you're flying kind of where near I'm flying. There's a company that has cargo on a ship over here, and they want to know if it's where it says it is. Ships, like airplanes, have a transponder. It's called an AIS transponder. It sends information up via RF signal, and it says, I'm a ship, here's where I am, here's how low in the water I'm sitting right now for safety reasons. Trust me, I'm saying it. Ships lie a lot. Usually one's full of oil. We started finding instances and reporting them very quickly that a lot of ships coming from South Africa were saying they were coming to the United States, and man, were they making some really straight lines. And then we started mapping the RF footprint and realized they were going to Venezuela, which also explained why it looked like they just dropped half their fuel load in the middle of the ocean. And they were dropping off their fuel in Venezuela and then sailing the rest of the way up to the United States to drop off more fuel. So that violates multiple treaties, which turned into an interesting thing where you could report that. So that's one use case. The next use case is radio frequency spectrum. Did you know you have to register what spectrum everything you do uses? So your cell phone, like if you have a Verizon phone, they get in trouble every once in a while for this. They have spectrum. It's like 800 to 900 something megahertz, I think. And if they go outside of that spectrum based on congestion, it's actually against their license. They're not supposed to do that. So there's a spectrum allocation office in the United States. You can fly over a city with your satellite and just turn a software-defined radio on to listen within a specific range of frequencies, let's say like 20 megahertz of range. You'll record everything that happens in that 20 megahertz of range. You can then provide that to the spectrum office. If you're using a Verizon phone, your SIM card ID will show up, simply put. So then you can say, well, this is a Verizon SIM card and it's outside of its proper spectrum. That'd be a violation of your license. So there's contracts that exist specifically for reporting that type of thing. Why does that relate to cyber? If I'm a bad guy, or if I'm a company that doesn't want to get caught, you can manipulate the data coming down from the satellite in between where it starts and where it goes, depending on its wavelength. So the most common wavelength that satellites use is going to be your UHF and your VHF. So that's ultra high frequency and very high frequency radios. Radios are a unique thing. They're based on how wide the band is. When you're doing UHF and VHF, it's a satellite looking at Earth going like this. Everything inside of my arms should be able to hear this. So basically an entire hemisphere. More advanced satellites get to S and X band, which is like everyone in here should still be able to hear what I'm saying. When you get to cool satellites in national security purposes, they use what's called Ka-Ku band. That's like looking through a straw, but the straw is 20 feet in front of you, and that's exactly what you have to be looking at. So if you ever notice government installations that have giant satellite downlink towers, and the fence is a very specific distance away, and then outside of the fence there's about 20 to 30 feet more if there's no trees and anything that could block anything, that's your exact range of how wide Ka-Ku band is from something at 40,000 kilometers away. It's expensive. No one wants to do that. So everyone's using UHF, VHF, SNX, and they're just yelling. You can capture that information. You can capture it by making what looks like a tree that's actually a listening post and then retransmitting the data. You can fly an airplane between 2 points, collect the data, and send the data. You could just be in a taller building within the same bandwidth area, collect it, and retransmit it. Anything you do, you can manipulate this data. That's just on the link segment. When you get more tricky, you get into the supply chain interdiction attacks that can occur against satellites. The coolest supply chain attack I have seen was on a camera. The camera we found had code that if you took a photo of Earth from space and there was a specific set of buildings in a specific order, it told the camera to remove other buildings and roads from the photo. So you could disappear something that was happening in another country if you knew the exact pattern of buildings. It just removed things from the photo. That is a very sophisticated cyber attack. To do machine vision on something that is an off-the-shelf component and remove a government building from a nation state from existence anytime that camera is used. Now, anytime the other camera is used that's not manipulated, you go, something's not right. But satellite companies don't talk to each other about their vulnerabilities or their problems, publicly or in private. They're trying to, but they don't yet. There's a group called the Space Information Sharing and Analysis Center, an ISAC. Weird name. There's a lot of these. There's ISACs for critical infrastructure. There's ISACs for IT systems. There's ISACs for medical systems. Anything that we deem a critical infrastructure is supposed to have an Information Sharing and Analysis Center cell. They're stood up by the government, they become nonprofits, and then they work based on funding from corporate entities, government entities, you name it. So I work with the ISAC, which is luckily located where I live in Colorado Springs, Colorado. They work between the CIA, the NRO, then Defense Intelligence Agency, then they work with Lockheed Martin, Northrop Grumman, Microsoft, Amazon, everybody, Deloitte, you name it. And the purpose is we work together with satellite companies and we monitor the cyber health of the satellites from the ground. They give us some of their telemetry from space so that we can kind of understand what's going on in the satellites and at least on their ground infrastructure, because those are a different nightmare. And then from there, you can tell them, hey, I noticed a ransomware attack. I'm sure you already did. Here's where it came from. Because they don't always have sophisticated means of cyber defense. Satellites built by governments and satellites built by companies are built for purpose. The purpose being, do the mission, whatever the mission is. If it's Viasat, it's connect people to the internet. If it's DirecTV, it's get people TV, right? If it's a government satellite, it might be doing intelligence gathering and collection for whatever purpose, but they have a purpose. Anytime you want to introduce cyber, they think you're going to break their toy, you're going to add latency, you're a terrible person, reason, insert, whatever, right? So government satellites have had requirements for cyber. These are the things you're supposed to do. You have money that's obligated for doing cyber. Government satellites just go, yeah, that's really hard, I'm not going to do that, and then they just don't. So they have waivers from doing anything cyber-related still to this day. And that's not exactly okay. So there's a change coming. There's requirements that are actually starting to be followed and starting to get teeth, and no one knows what these requirements are yet. No one knows how to build cyber tools for everything being bespoke. Everything is unique. Think of computers forever ago. There used to be like Compaq, there used to be E-Machine, there used to be all these different computers. There used to be even more flavors of Linux than there are today, not just forks of Ubuntu, right? There was lots of unique things. Eventually the market came together and decided there was one common way we should do things, and it's PC and Mac, with all the flavors of Linux being the most powerful and best. But everyone uses PC and Mac, right? Satellites haven't gotten there yet. It's like you could talk to Northrop Grumman and say you want a satellite, and they'll build you one. And then you could talk to Northrop Grumman again and say I want a different satellite. They won't even have the same communication protocols between these two satellites. Some of that is clever business thinking. Well, it's custom to us, so you could never give that contract away to Lockheed Martin, right? I get it. I guess it's a smart move from a business perspective, but it makes things really hard from a cyber perspective. Until there's common language being used for command and control and everything, satellites are going to continue being vulnerable. So, there's a few things we learned that are kind of like our guiding rules for what we're doing at Deloitte. Know yourself. What is the satellite? What does it do? What is the non-recurring engineering required for either us to reverse engineer a satellite, or if the satellite manufacturer is cool, they hand us a book. The book is called the Data Definition Document. The book tells you everything. It tells you how the satellite communicates. It tells you about the interfaces. It tells you about the operating system, the versioning, everything you need to know about the satellite. So we have our data definition book for the Deloitte One satellite, but we don't let the engineers use it. Instead, they have to fuzz the satellite. So our satellite has 3 computers on it that we get to use. One of those is the defensive cyber payload that's out of band and monitoring everything. The other one is a victim, poor guy. The third one is a malicious actor. We are hacking our satellite from on our satellite inside of itself, and then monitoring what's going on all the systems so we can generate all the profile data so that we can learn how this works. We're launching more satellites because this one was kind of novel and cool, but there's better capabilities now than there was 2 years ago when we engineered it. The next ones have GPUs. GPUs are going to be cool. We are already working on all the different ML applications for doing heuristics, monitoring that every day the satellite does the same thing. But this one time, the power subsystem noted that a radio turned on when we were over a country that there's no ground station for us. Why would it do that? So we're starting to build out profiles for what nominal operations look like. Gives us the opportunity to report on non-nominal. So, rule 2, don't do the adversary's job for them. Everything I just talked about is an intrusion detection system. It's really cool. I'm going to tell you your satellite's broke after it's broken. You're not going to be able to do anything about it, but I'm going to tell you how it happened. That's not the most useful thing, but if you go intrusion prevention system too soon, you could become the thing that makes the satellite the brick. And you just don't want to be responsible for anything from a $2 million satellite to a $10 billion satellite. I don't think I'd want that on my conscience to have a brick. Rule 3, engineer with the assumption that the system will be compromised because it will. Have you ever heard of an application or system that said it was going to be unhackable just to find out a week later someone broke into it? I feel like we see this all the time. You know, it's future-proof. This is going to be the best thing, and something goes wrong. Nothing is actually forever secure. You will always find a way to break into everything. So don't assume it's secure, because it's not. Don't assume your supply chain is the best, because it probably isn't. You're probably printing your PCB from somewhere where you will find foreign influence and dollars or someone nefarious in the supply chain every single time. And just know you need to do something about it. So those are the main rules and the things that we learned building what we built. I think there are starting to become more companies that are doing the same thing. The biggest problem with space is no one will let you play with their space thing until you've proven that your space thing doesn't break someone else's space thing in space. We started this by building flat sats and buying components, and then we would be like, hey, company, this is the exact model that you use, here's all the vulnerabilities. We would love to, I will literally pay you for me to test my thing on your thing. And they would just say, no, because I don't know if your thing's gonna break my thing once it gets into space. I'd be like, no, it's like super secure, like it's built in a way that it shouldn't, and it'd be really hard. It would require physical access to reprogram the FPGA, and they would just be like, yeah, nah, we're not doing that. So we literally had to buy, build, and launch a satellite just to prove that our thing doesn't break your thing. And now that we're proving that our thing doesn't break your thing, the companies are finally like, hey, we saw you did it. Come over here and play. And so now my team is really giddy, and it's grown from 3 people 5 years ago to 29 people as of 2 weeks ago. And they are traveling the world doing this. There's 2 people in Japan today. There were people in Barcelona a few weeks ago. There's people going to Australia, people going to Scotland. I always take the Scotland trips. I like Scotch. And we get to reverse engineer and touch these things. We get to meet with chief scientists of massive space companies and learn about how they do things, why they do them the way they do them. And occasionally I can't hold back and say that was really dumb, you should have done it better. But I try my best not to. So that's all I've got to talk about, but I've never talked about space and all these things without wanting to give people an opportunity to ask me questions. And to be clear, I will answer the question as honestly as I can, and if I don't know the answer, I will tell you. But I do see that there's at least 2 microphones if there are questions for me. Otherwise, I will leave. Not yet.
Thank you. I think we have to keep Brian busy for next 15 minutes. So I think why don't you ask questions? This is the time for make use of the opportunity. Come forward and use the microphone, and let's get those questions. Who would like to come forward first? Dave, yes, please.
Good.
Dave is a faculty at Utah Valley University. He's also an online PhD student, so he's a networking expert.
Good. Make it hurt.
So how do you deal with software that, you have updates and things, and maybe you're trying to modernize. How do you deal with things like loaded Linux kernels and other things when it comes to limited space on things that are already in orbit?
Yeah, uplinking things to space kind of sucks. We can uplink 1 megabyte a day. That's all you get. How do you update things with 1 megabyte a day? So we took the approach here of doing things in triplicate. We have a known good version of our code that's in space. We utilize Docker for everything that we do. Then we have the current version, and then we have the last version. Docker is kind of big, 12 megabytes every time. That would take 12 days every time we want to update something. So we found a way in our CI/CD pipeline to actually do diffs of a Docker container itself. So the Docker container can tear itself apart, do a diff command so we can only upload 300 kilobytes, and then the diffs will update the container and it'll recontainerize itself, and then that becomes the current version. That reduced our uplink capability, our requirements, from 12 plus megabytes to 300 to 500 kilobytes. We only do updates every once in a while, and then the next part, we only uplink at the last minute. So our dev pipeline starts with a 1-for-1 replica of our DCO hardware that's in a lab that we can SSH into. Makes it really easy. Then from there, we have a flat sat that's a 1-for-1 replica of the satellite that's in orbit that mimics orbit operations. So you have to actually wait for uplink windows, downlink windows to do any testing, but it's super safe. And then if those 2 things didn't break anything, we push it to space. So that's the process for everything we've done. The real-time operating system is based on using Yocto to do builds, and it's kind of a pain in the butt if you don't have all the build files from the PCB manufacturer and the satellite manufacturer. But that's how we've been doing that.
Next question.
Yeah.
We have one more.
What was that one on?
On?
Nope.
All right, thank you. Benjamin Anderson, UT San Antonio. Well, security's not new, but the real push for security is pretty new. So I guess opposed to that, what is the oldest satellite you've worked on, and what was its incredibly low compute power that it had? Thank you.
Yep. So being a persistent infrared person, my oldest satellites were from 1967. The OPIR sensor on them could see 4 pixels. That 4 pixels related to a side of the Earth. And it would just say something real hot right there. It had about 20 megahertz with a custom ASIC, and there was nothing I could do for it from a cyber perspective. And it had no encryption, so anyone that, there's still like 2 DSPAs in orbit today. You can just see whatever they're doing by just listening for UHF frequencies. It's pretty bad. Can't fix those.
Hi, Daniel Brown, coach from the Air Force Academy. For satellite systems, what SIEM or security software have you found to be the best for like monitoring from a cyber defense perspective?
Do you mean on the satellite?
Yes.
There is no such thing. There literally is nothing. So the satellites, like 95% of them, there's not even a login when you try to access it via RF. You just send the properly structured command and it just executes it. So that's how I was able to get 30% of the things above my head, which I made them all do 1/360, so I didn't like use a bunch of resources. That doesn't even require any like propellant. Yeah, there's unfortunately no seam.
Hi, my name is Mohammed Minhaj Manji, and I'm from University of Wyoming with Dr. Zuong. So my question is, has there been an event where you ran some process and your entire system got hanged, and what would you do in such cases? Because, you know, satellite is in the space, you don't have direct access to the hardware to go into it and, you know, restart or something.
Yeah, so the way our software works is whenever we're processing, if we detect an event, we keep telemetry at plus or minus 5 minutes of whatever the event is. So even if that event is our software having a crash, we have telemetry plus minus 5 minutes, and then we downlink all that. You might be able to only upload 1 megabyte a day, but you can downlink like 3 gigabytes a day. So we can get boatloads of data down for doing diagnostics on our code. Satellites also have a fault detection system on basically every satellite since, I would say, the mid-'80s. And those are really good at flipping the switches for recovering a satellite and understanding what happened. Does that help answer that?
Yeah, and I have one more question.
Yeah.
Initially, you said that the ecosystem is not regularized, like in computer systems, you have proper Windows or Mac, right?
Mm-hmm.
So did someone try to regularize it, or did nobody try?
NASA is trying.
Yeah.
So there is a NASA flight system you can use that's just based in C, and you can find it on GitHub. It's okay. They have a goal right now of rebuilding the entire system into Rust, because for those who don't know, C has problems with memory. And you can accidentally have a memory leak and it'll just take everything up and then it just crashes everything. It's not the best. Rust has way better protections. There's also the most common one used in CubeSats is Kubos. It's a fork of Ubuntu. Of course, everything in Linux is a fork of Ubuntu these days. So the fork of Ubuntu one is actually pretty safe and it has pretty good hardware support, but it requires custom builds for all of the different hardware components. So you have to write your own drivers, and that part's kind of painful.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I'm Sajad Shah, PhD candidate from University of Wyoming, supervised by Dr. Mike Zuckerberg. Actually, my question is about has 2 parts. One is the IDS engine. The second, like in the IDS engine, do you guys have like any specific signature or rules where you detect those intrusions, or you perform that on FPGA?
We're using the SoC, so we're using the ARM64 CPU for the IDS components. The purpose of the FPGA is, well, I guess I can explain the architecture really quickly. Mm-hmm. The FPGA does ingest and it does flagging. So it flags the component that sent the message if it was over Ethernet or over CAN. And then those flags go onto an MQTT. So we use Mosquito, small MQTT bus. Then there's analytics down the line on the CPU side. The analytics based on the flags know exactly which analytics to run. So the signatures are based on the analytic, which is then tied to the flags. So then we make sure we're not wasting compute running every analytic. So that's how we do those. And then there, at the end of the whole queue, there's a tagging mechanism that tags if we have any alerts.
And during that process, what's your up and down link bandwidth?
The uplink is 1 megabyte a day, and downlink is like 2 gigabytes a day, or maybe 3, if you pay extra money for more time.
All right, okay, thank you.
Yep.
Riel Michelik, Red River High School. So you mentioned that you had to get your own satellite to just prove that you could work on them for other companies. How exactly did you afford those satellites? And what kind of software were you loading them with? Was it like pre-existing software to run, or were they doing anything in particular?
Yeah. So Deloitte has an internal R&D budget because, of course, they do, because it's a tax credit. So I went into a large room like this in front of 2,400 Deloitte partners, which are the owners of the company, and I said, hey guys, hear me out. I would love it if you gave me $4.2 million. I'm not guaranteeing I'm gonna make you $1 back, but I'm gonna reverse engineer a satellite and put it into space, and that's gonna be kind of cool. That's how that conversation went. Software-wise, the attacking payload in space actually has Docker images for Kali payloads. So we utilize the Kali payloads, and then we just send up like 2 kilobyte bash messages that know exactly how to run the Kali command so that we're not wasting too much bandwidth. And then we downlink all the results. Cool. That's a great question, yeah.
I'm Miles Roberts from Dakota State University, and I was wondering, you're talking about being able to send, anybody sending instructions to these satellites, is like any one government particularly suspect, or like private sector?
No, that's the sad part, it's everybody.
It's just okay.
One of my favorite YouTube channels, it's called like Building Stuff with Junk or something. And like he built a 3-meter dish on top of his Subaru Forester, and he was collecting downlinked data in visible spectrum, near visible spectrum, and overhead persistent infrared spectrum over the United States from a defense, national defense asset that was unencrypted. And then he was demodulating it and actually showing the intelligence gathered on YouTube. So you can do commercial or you can do government. It literally doesn't matter. They're all terrible.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Hi, John Boner, Dakota State University. So in your research, have you provided any type of framework towards more robust satellite SATCOM infrastructure, such as OS, FIPS client operating systems, structured VSDL, apologize, I'm cutting out, or other such type of security measures, especially when you're dealing with an environment where the reason why that processor costs $100,000 is because it's radiation hardened and EMI hardened.
Yeah, there are groups in the government, so specifically the Air Force Research Labs. They have a group and they're building a capability they call CHESS. CHESS is supposed to be the hardened version of a flight software that they wish to release publicly. So it's a project, I think it's on, I don't know if it's on GitLab just yet, but think of it as a hardened flight computer that mitigates a lot of default cyber risks. So it's the first hardened flight computer. Then there's also a few companies working on tools that are trying to do everything from zero trust implementations. Some have tested them, like Spider Oak. They tested it by uplinking it to the International Space Station. And that implements a zero trust and login mechanism framework. But it's all very hodgepodge. There's nothing great just yet.
Hi, I'm Leslie Viviani from UND. I'm curious, when your system triggers an alert that something has happened, like what is the lag time between coming back down and the response that is then sent? Like how are you able to do that loop?
Yeah, it is not near real time. When we send commands to our satellite to do an attack, so you have to wait for a window, so usually Australia is a good target. You send your command, 90 minutes later, if you do it at the right ground station in Australia, you'll get another link capability in 90 minutes. So attack, gather data, hopefully at the 90-minute mark it's ready and has results, and it sends those results down. In our longest contact windows, I think we have 4 hours between when we send something and when we get a response.
Okay, So in a real-time event, it would be
At least 4 hours, until you'd even know it was wrong. And then you'd have to wait until your next uplink window to send a responsive action if you had a responsive action. So it could be 6 hours.
Okay. And there's no real-time responsive, like you couldn't on the fly have a coder down here going, ooh, I can fix that.
Nope.
It has to be predefined.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
We've looked at ways to, and found ways already, to reprogram the FPGA in orbit to become in-band for response capabilities, but we don't have enough confidence in any responses yet to actually enable such a thing. Yeah. We'll get there, though.
All right. Carl Arabit, Freehold High School. So I was just wondering, you mentioned before that like some companies make really dumb decisions with like cybersecurity and stuff. I was wondering, what was the dumbest decision that you've seen?
Oh. The dumbest one was definitely using a student version of MATLAB for a government satellite. So it saved them a bunch of money to do what they were trying to do, like $100,000 on the license per year. But it introduced specific cyber vulnerabilities that were only applicable to the student version of MATLAB versus the enterprise version. So basically, you could do unauthenticated or unsigned MATLAB code in the satellite, and you could have done some pretty nasty things.
All right, thank you.
Yeah.
Leah Schmidt from Dakota State University. I was wondering, you mentioned that like implementing an IPS too early on the satellite could brick it. What kind of like testing would you have to do to be comfortable with implementing an IPS on a satellite?
We have a roadmap for how we're going to do that, actually. So the roadmap here is IDS is going to send down a bunch of alerts to operators that actually operate satellites out of Schriever Space Force Base. And once we get enough what they would do over time and build a pattern, we intend on starting to build in automatic things based on factors like, did it cause a problem when they did the thing that they said wasn't going to break anything? So it's a crawl, walk, run, and it's going to take a while, is the short answer. I'm also impatient, so I started building LLMs in my garage that could detect and automatically respond just to see what would happen in one of our simulated environments. And eventually, one LLM is writing cyber attacks against the satellite, and the other one is writing response capabilities against the satellite, and they're just butting heads. And it's happening faster than I thought it would, but the bad guy's still winning, and by a lot. So space is hard.
Thank you.
Yep.
Rishab Ranjit, Freehold High School. While auditing, have you ever messed up a system or gone close to?
Have I ever messed up a system? Yes. Yes. I was doing, not for space, well, it was a ground segment. It wasn't a space segment. But I instructed the ground segment that they had to turn on ACAS. ACAS is a full suite of tools. It's a host intrusion detection and network intrusion detection system. And I told them explicitly that they had to put it in learn, but do not implement mode. And what they heard was learn and implement mode. For those who have never used a host intrusion detection system like ACAS, everything is considered a threat immediately. So the next morning when everyone came to work, everything was locked out of everything because the HIDs had determined that everyone was an attack vector and it shut down all network communications.
Thank you.
Yep.
Hello, I'm Jive Mann from Dakota State University. I was a quick question since you said it's a really small satellite. Like, how dependent are you for like environmental or weather factors for like your communications? Like, do you have to have people still studying like, okay, weather in Australia is this, so we can't do this, or how does that work?
So I work for Deloitte. So there is a part of the firm on sustainability and survivability of assets, and they had to come out and do a study with the satellite manufacturer to determine the environmental footprint, carbon footprint, and any impacts on nature based on the RF frequencies that we were using. I don't know all the details. All I know is they said we got a green check mark and they liked it.
Nice, okay. And I guess just a quick little follow-up is, how do you know if like a command, like, you used to have something because you have like very slow, like, how do you know if they have like success, or how do you know it did what you think it did? Like, how do you like get?
You just have to wait. So the other thing that kind of sucks about radio frequency communications to space systems, there's things that can happen between the ground and space where radiation from the sun can cause bit flipping. It can mess with the message, or your satellite might not have enough radiation hardening remaining and it'll flip a bit in the CPU. So bad things can happen just because of that, and sometimes you just don't know until they happen. One of the ways we mitigated this was the FPGA is not hardened on our satellite. We're in low Earth orbit, so that's okay, except for over the anomaly zone over like South America. But We run our commands in triplicate in the FPGA, and then at the end, there's a democratic voting system. So the command runs 3 times, and then at the end, they vote, and as long as 2 out of 3 vote the same way, that we just assume that's the right answer.
Awesome. All right, thank you.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Avas from the University of Wyoming. So there's probably a lot of faults that occur in a satellite. So are you more concerned about the faults that occur due to a cybersecurity attack, or like regular faults that can occur due to the conditions that the satellite are in, like radiation from the sun or something like that?
I'm worried about all of it, but what's cool about being attached to all the subsystems is you already get to see all of it. So you're already seeing the power subsystem, you're already seeing the flight computer, the telemetry. You're gonna know if a solar wind hits the satellite and causes it to shift based purely on GPS information. So we're monitoring for everything from incidentals to intentionals, and then alerting based on whatever. A unique benefit though, solar panels degrade over time, if for those of you who didn't know. I mean, like the day you put a solar panel on, it's like 90% efficient, and in like a week, it's like 10% efficient. It's like a dramatic drop. So in space, we monitor it as it's either working or it's not. We can actually predict when it's no longer gonna be working at this point, because we can see the degradation and start charting it over time on the satellite, which is really useful for that life expectancy. So to answer the question, everything all the time, all of it.
So just a follow-up, so which type of fault is more occurring in the satellite, like a cyber attack or just a common failure that would occur?
Anomalous things happen more often, at least to our satellite today, than nefarious ones, except for when we're intentionally injecting nefarious things.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Hey, it's me again. You said that you write all the code in a version of C, but what's the proper operating system, for example, that you would use, or do you have specific hardware, software to write that code?
Okay, so our developers all have different preferences, is the short answer of that. I use Mac because it works really well with Deloitte systems, and then I just build everything inside of like virtual machines inside of that emulate ARM64 chips. Some of the devs actually have dedicated hardware Linux boxes, and then we also have physical server infrastructure and a small bank of ARM CPUs. So we try to develop as close to we can as reflective with the ARM64, but sometimes you have to use an emulation layer and run it in an x86. And then some people use VS Code, some people just use Vim, like me. So it just kind of depends on who you are. It's preference.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Wow, that's an engaging question session. Any final question? Maybe I should ask, what do you, they have so many students here, right? What do you advise them that they should work on? We have students in computer science, cybersecurity. What are the challenges that you think that they can spend some time now?
So standing up here, I should have said this in the beginning. Most people would probably assume I have some really great technical engineering degree background or something. My advice is don't feel limited to whatever you're doing. My first degree is in network engineering. I was really good at looking at my shoes when I would talk to people. My second degree is in business. I learned how to look at your shoes while I was talking to you. And then my third degree is in business, where I learned how to look out above all of you instead of making direct eye contact with too many of you at one time. So get comfortable doing technical translations for people, because people in the business world have no idea what we're saying unless we say it in a way that it makes sense to them, either financially or in a way that you can translate it so that they can understand it.
With that, let's thank Brian for his time, and this is a token of appreciation from you.
Oh, thank you, sir. I appreciate that.
I don't know that.
It's all right. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Okay, that's awesome.